listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I help people who are engaging in anything they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. No shame, no blame, no judgments. If you would like my help making sense of your infidelity situation and deciding what you want to do with it, let's work together. You can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I offer confidential, compassionate coaching via Zoom, which means we can work together no matter where you're located. I can't wait to meet you. Okay, today we're going to talk about loneliness, and there are a lot of definitions of loneliness out there, and I think some of them are pretty bad, such as the one that holds that loneliness is the feeling that comes from isolation or being alone. Being alone or isolated doesn't necessarily lead us to feel lonely. Our circumstances never dictate our feelings, and we can be alone and feel fine about it. But on the other hand, if we are alone and we don't like that, we may feel lonely. Or if we don't have the contacts or relationships with others that we'd like to have, we may feel lonely. So some definitions of loneliness hold that it's the feeling we feel when there's a gap between our desired social connections and our actual social connections, or what we feel when there is a perceived gap between our desire for the company of other people or certain types of company we can experience with other people and the amount or quality of company from others we're actually getting. For today's purposes, I think the definitions I just mentioned are a sufficient starting point. I think it's sufficient to say that loneliness is what we feel when we perceive a gap between the type or quality of relationships that we'd like to have and the type or quality of relationships that we actually have or think we actually have. I think there's a lot more we could say about loneliness and how people experience it, but I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that right now. I just wanted to start off by providing you with some sense of what I mean when I say loneliness. And loneliness, or a fear of loneliness, is a big factor in some people's infidelity situations. It's a big factor in a lot of people's lives in general and love lives in particular, even if infidelity isn't a factor. So we all stand to benefit from learning more about loneliness and taking a look at our relationship with it. But obviously, given the focus of this podcast, I'm mainly concerned with how loneliness intersects with infidelity. And when it comes to infidelity situations and loneliness, there are two distinct yet related problems that I'm going to talk about today. And the first is that in general, we don't like feeling lonely. A lot of us have a pretty outsized aversion to loneliness or an outsized fear of feeling lonely. We don't like actually feeling lonely, and we don't like the idea of feeling lonely. And we often try to get rid of the feeling of loneliness if we're experiencing it, and we often try to preemptively avoid feeling lonely. And sometimes the things we do in an attempt to not feel lonely have consequences that we do not like. Consequences is kind of a loaded word, but what I mean is simply that any actions we take will have some kind of an outcome or some kind of a result. And although the things we do in an attempt to avoid feeling loneliness may indeed help us temporarily avoid feeling loneliness or kind of numb the feeling of loneliness, they may have other consequences or other results too. And we may not like those results. We may not like what happens when we try to avoid feeling loneliness. And that's the second problem. So more specifically, when we are terrified of loneliness, we may depend on a person or persons in an attempt to avoid feeling lonely or in an attempt to deal with feeling lonely. We may, for instance, pursue or continue relationships that we aren't really all that excited about because being in any relationship seems like a better option than being alone or quote unquote alone and potentially feeling lonely. Side note here, sometimes when we think we're alone, we're not actually alone. We may have lots of people around us. We may have many wonderful relationships in our lives. We may simply mean that we're alone in the sense that we don't have a romantic partner, or we might mean something else by being alone. But rarely are we as literally alone as we may think we are when we say, oh, I'm alone, or I'm going to be alone, right? Okay, that's the end of the side note. This, of course, can have implications for anyone and anybody in any relationship, even if infidelity is not a factor, right? We can pursue relationships or continue relationships that we don't really love, even if infidelity isn't a part of our situation. But this kind of thing can and does come up in infidelity situations a lot. So, for example, this comes up a lot when people are considering leaving an established relationship, partially for the purpose of having a shot at a relationship with someone else, someone that they've been involved with alongside being in a committed relationship. And people sometimes fear that they may be lonely if they leave their established relationship, because even if they're unhappy with it, they're used to it. It's familiar, it's comfortable. And they're afraid they'll be lonely without the relationship and without their established partner's companionship. And this fear of loneliness can and does lead people to choose to stay in a relationship they aren't all that thrilled with, even when they know they really want something else, even when they have the possibility of another relationship right in front of them. Similarly, sometimes people are afraid of not having anyone. They're afraid that if they end one relationship to pursue another, the relationship they're pursuing might not work out at some point down the road. And then at this undetermined point in the future, they will be alone and they'll feel lonely and it'll be totally terrible, or at least terrible for as far as they can imagine, right? Sometimes people truly believe that if they're involved with two people and it doesn't work out forever with either of those people, they might not ever find someone to love them again. And some people just believe that it might take a while for them to find someone new who they really connect with. But whether you think you can't meet anyone ever again, or whether you think that it's going to take a while for you to find someone to connect with again, it can be pretty painful to think these kinds of things. These kinds of beliefs can inspire a great fear of loneliness and be pretty paralyzing. People who believe the kinds of things I just mentioned often do not make clear decisions about their relationships and may just stay in the limbo of their infidelity situation, even if they hate being in limbo, because the fear of loneliness makes it seem too damn scary to do anything else. Now, it's also, of course, possible to feel deeply lonely even if you are in a romantic relationship. Sometimes we think that if we have a partner, we won't feel lonely, but a lot of people feel very lonely indeed, even when they do have a partner in a committed relationship. And sometimes people deal with that by finding another relationship to soothe the loneliness they're experiencing within the first relationship or the existing relationship. And of course, sometimes this is done in a way that constitutes cheating, that constitutes infidelity. Someone feels lonely in their marriage, but they don't want to deal with what's going on in their marriage, so they'll look for someone else to connect with. And on the one hand, that connection may relieve the person of their loneliness, but now they're in a marriage that they're not all that excited about, and they have an infidelity situation on their hands that may be quite a thing to deal with in its own right. And so in solving the problem of their loneliness, they've created a few other challenges for themselves to deal with, right? Instead of dealing with loneliness in ways that create a bunch of undesirable results or undesirable consequences for us, we can instead learn how to deal with loneliness in a new way. And when we can do this, we can make decisions about our relationships that we are much happier with on the whole. And that's a good thing, right? So how do we do this? How can we develop a relationship with loneliness that serves us well? How can we deal with loneliness in such a way that it doesn't drive or dictate the decisions we make about our romantic relationships? For starters, we want to recognize loneliness for what it is. It's a feeling or an emotion. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you know that emotions are sensations in our bodies that are created through our thinking. And it's so incredibly important for us to remember that emotions, even the ones we don't particularly like to feel, are a normal part of the human experience. We have done ourselves such a tremendous disservice in our society by valorizing a certain set of emotions and pathologizing a certain set of emotions. And loneliness is definitely one of the emotions we've come to consider negative or undesirable or bad. But ultimately, loneliness is just a set of sensations in your body. And we can survive sensations in our body even if they aren't terribly pleasant. Loneliness can be uncomfortable, but we can ride the waves of that discomfort with a reasonable amount of goodwill if we choose to. And then we can survive the experience of the emotion, and from that place, make clear decisions about the situation we're in. Make decisions about our relationships that serve our longer-term interests and our deepest desires and highest priorities. But that isn't what we usually do. We usually don't ride out the waves of the sensations of loneliness in our body. Instead, we usually think that loneliness is a problem and that the feeling is bad and that we need to do something about it immediately. Maybe we need to numb the feeling. Maybe we need to distract ourselves from it. Maybe we need to find someone to connect with or keep us company immediately. But what if we could just feel it? What if we could just tolerate feeling loneliness? What if we could entertain the radical idea that loneliness is not a problem per se? Now, just to be clear, I am not suggesting that you would want to feel lonely all the time. I'm not suggesting that you want loneliness to be your dominant emotion every day for weeks upon weeks on end, and that if it is, you shouldn't try to do anything about it other than just feel the feeling. And to be clear, I'm also not saying that there's something wrong with preferring to have a romantic partner or partners over not having a romantic partner or partners. It is legitimate to like companionship in general, and this kind of companionship or romantic or sexual companionship in particular. Some people would say that humans are hardwired for connection, and whether you like that kind of biological determinism or not, it's totally fair to want the company of other people. The point of tolerating loneliness isn't to turn yourself into a hermit. Rather, the problem is that a lot of us don't want to feel lonely at all, as in not even for a minute. Forget about turning into a hermit. Some people cannot stand the idea of experiencing 60 seconds of loneliness, right? And to echo what I said earlier, this is the problem because this aversion to loneliness can end up motivating us to engage in our relationships in ways that we don't really like and to make decisions about how we do things in our relationships that don't get us more of what we ultimately want to experience. So what we have the opportunity to do is be willing to feel our loneliness instead of trying to avoid it, instead of trying to get rid of it when we do feel it, instead of trying to find elaborate schemes that can prevent us from ever having to experience it. And the great news is we can start to practice doing this. We can start to practice feeling our loneliness in tiny little increments. Cultivating willingness to feel loneliness is like training for a sporting event in a sport that you're completely new to. If you've never run a mile, you don't just run a marathon one day. Well, maybe you do, but most people probably need to start with something shorter. You start with getting some new sneakers and going for a jog. And then maybe the next day you do that same jog all over again. And then if that's easy, you run a little longer the next day. And it's just like that with practicing feeling loneliness. We can start small. We don't have to tackle our fear of loneliness in one day. We can dedicate ourselves to developing new habits in relation to loneliness and practicing them consistently. And the most important habit that we want to start to cultivate is awareness. If we notice that we're feeling lonely, we can pause and ask ourselves, okay, here it is. I'm feeling lonely. What does this actually feel like in the most immediate sense? If I trust that emotions are sensations in our bodies that are generated through our thinking, what sensations am I feeling right now? And then after you ask yourself this, you can tune in and notice what's happening in your body. This does take willingness and effort. Most of us are in the habit of trying to avoid or resist our uncomfortable feelings the second we notice ourselves feeling them. But it is totally possible to change our habits and willingly feel our feelings. So we tune in. We tune into the immediate physical experience of feeling loneliness, and we see what we notice in our bodies. Maybe loneliness feels like heaviness in our limbs. Maybe it feels like our chest is hollow. Maybe we feel a pit in our stomach. Maybe our throat feels tight. Maybe it feels like we're going to cry. Maybe we do cry. Maybe we feel hot. Maybe we feel cold. Maybe our left foot twitches. There are a lot of different ways we might feel the emotion of loneliness in our bodies. And the point isn't that there are certain sensations that you should be on the lookout for. The point is to tune in and notice what you feel. It may be that at first you don't really know what you feel. You don't notice much of anything in terms of sensations in your body. That's okay. Most of us are used to dealing with our feelings as cognitive events. We're not used to dealing with our feelings as bodily experiences. And it takes practice to develop this kind of attention and awareness. But the great benefit of doing this, of learning how to feel our feelings in our bodies, is that we start to notice that we can survive the sensations that we're feeling in the present moment. Loneliness might not feel great, but you're probably not going to implode from feeling the sensations that you associate with loneliness. Sometimes it might feel like you might, but you probably won't. And if you stay focused on the immediate physical sensations you are experiencing, you can deal with them one moment at a time, one breath at a time. Now, we may have to talk ourselves through this. We might say to ourselves, oh my God, I'm feeling loneliness. Oh my God, it feels like my heart is going to cave in. Oh my God, it feels like I'm going to implode. Oh, but I didn't implode. Oh God, it's still here. The sensations are still here. It feels like I'm going to implode again. Oh, but I just survived that moment too. I'm still here. I'm still breathing. Maybe I really can hang in there with feeling this emotion for another moment or two or three. That may be what the process of allowing yourself to feel loneliness is like. But again, to reiterate, we usually don't do anything like this. What usually happens is that we notice we're feeling lonely or we feel afraid of feeling lonely, and we instantly start making this mean something very bad. Even if we just have the vague sense that loneliness is a problem of some sort, that can be a pretty powerful thought. And it may inspire us to attempt to get rid of the feeling of loneliness as quickly as possible by any means necessary. And this, of course, is where we may start to make decisions about our relationships or how we engage with other people that don't line up with our deepest desires and highest priorities. So part of developing a new relationship with loneliness entails being willing to be present with the immediate physical experience of the emotion. When we start to see that we really can get through feeling lonely one moment at a time, we no longer have to fear loneliness or try to avoid it. We can just stay present with ourselves as we experience it. And when we show ourselves that we really can do that, we gain so much power in our lives. We no longer have to make decisions based on a fear of loneliness. And this enables us to go after what we really want in our love lives instead of settling for whatever we think is going to enable us to feel less lonely. Now, another part of developing a new relationship with loneliness entails getting clear on how we are thinking about loneliness and getting clear on what we think the experience of being lonely means. The way we think about loneliness shapes our experience of feeling lonely. If we think that loneliness is a problem and therefore we shouldn't have to feel it, and that if we do feel it, something has gone really, really wrong, of course we're going to freak out if we feel lonely. And that just compounds our suffering. On the other hand, when we can deal with the original issue, that is, the discomfort of feeling lonely, without giving ourselves more problems to deal with by making the loneliness into a bigger issue, we can work our way through life with a little more ease. Now, we have a lot of shared understandings about why loneliness is bad or why it isn't good to feel loneliness. And I'm not going to talk extensively about what those are, but I do want to reiterate that the point I'm making here isn't that loneliness is totally great and that we should all love feeling it. It's reasonable to not like feeling lonely. It's reasonable to want rich and meaningful connections in life. But I do want to encourage you to consider that loneliness does not have to be a problem per se or a fundamentally bad thing. After all, humans have the capacity to experience a wide range of emotions, and it's that range that gives richness and depth to the human experience. Some would say that it isn't possible to fully experience an emotion without being able to fully experience the contrasting emotion or the opposite emotion. So for our purposes today, that would mean that without being willing to fully experience loneliness, we can't fully enjoy the pleasure of connection. Now, I don't think that has to be true in any absolute or literal sense for it to be an instructive idea. We can recognize that there can be great value in experiencing contrasts in life. Having experienced the absence of something that we really want may help us more fully appreciate the presence of something we really want. A lot of people find that to be true. But what I find even more helpful when it comes to thinking about loneliness is this. Loneliness may hurt. Letting go of a particular relationship may hurt, or not being in a romantic relationship at all may hurt. And the loneliness that comes from those situations may be pretty intense. But that intense loneliness may ultimately feel better to our soul than feeling comfortably numb. Feeling lonely may feel better than the relief from loneliness that we may get from staying in a relationship that isn't really right for us, or from pursuing a relationship with someone just for the sake of having someone. Or put differently, loneliness may feel better to the part of ourselves that trusts in our capacity to evolve and grow than attempting to avoid loneliness feels to that part of ourselves. It may feel a lot better to feel lonely and know that we're being true to ourselves than to feel protected from loneliness and know that we're selling ourselves out for pretty cheap. Kind of like that old saying that goes that it's better to be alone than in bad company. We may not like being alone. We may not like feeling lonely. But at some point, we may like being alone and feeling lonely a lot better than we like what we get out of spending time with certain people. And quite practically, sometimes being willing to feel lonely is the only way we can create the opportunity for ourselves to have the kinds of relationships we really want to have in life. This, of course, can be true in lots of situations, not just situations involving infidelity. If you yearn for deep and meaningful friendships, but you keep hanging out with a bunch of people you don't like very much because you think that's better than being home by yourself and possibly feeling lonely, being willing to tolerate that loneliness may be a necessary step if you're going to free up time and energy to meet new friends. So, as far as infidelity situations go, if you've been avoiding leaving your committed relationship because of the loneliness you think you might feel if you didn't have your committed partner in your life, and you're also seeing someone else, you aren't giving yourself the opportunity to go all in on any of your relationships. And you aren't enjoying any of the benefits that you might get from being technically single and not committed to anyone. You may think that what you're doing is having your cake and eating it too, and that could be your experience of what's happening for a while. But at a certain point, the decisions you make out of your desire to avoid feeling lonely may end up getting in the way of you having the kind of relationship or relationships that you really want to have, right? So to recap, loneliness is just an emotion. And that's not to minimize the importance of emotions, but we also don't want to overstate the significance of emotions. If we can willingly feel the immediate physical sensations associated with the emotion without adding a million layers of meaning onto the experience, we will have a much easier time tolerating loneliness. That doesn't mean it'll be pleasant, but we can totally do it. Getting clear on what we make loneliness mean, and perhaps adjusting what we make the experience of loneliness mean, is also really important. If we think that loneliness is a terrible thing that we shouldn't have to feel, and that if we feel it, it means there's something wrong with us, that is probably going to compound your suffering immensely. And there's no need to do that to yourself. On the other hand, if we recognize that loneliness is a normal human emotion, and maybe even an emotion that's worth experiencing at times, we're going to eliminate or at least reduce a lot of unnecessary suffering for ourselves. Sure, the loneliness itself may not feel awesome, but we can deal with it as a natural, normal, and maybe even inevitable part of human life rather than as a problem. Usually, the worst thing about feeling an emotion is not the sheer immediate physical experience of the emotion. It's what we make the emotion mean for us and about us. Finally, when we're willing to tolerate the emotion of loneliness, when we aren't desperate to not have to feel lonely, we're able to make relationship decisions that can get us more of what we want in our love lives. If we're willing to tolerate loneliness, we can say goodbye to a relationship that really isn't right for us anymore. If we're willing to feel lonely, we can make ourselves available to be with someone, even if we aren't sure they're going to choose to be with us. If we're willing to tolerate loneliness, we can be selective about what we want. We can pursue what we want without being desperate to get it. In next week's episode, I'm going to talk about creating contentment that isn't dependent upon romantic relationships, which is another important component in dealing with loneliness. Part of dealing with loneliness is dealing with the feeling itself and what we make the feeling mean, as we've been talking about today. But another aspect of dealing with loneliness is creating and sustaining more of the kinds of connections we want to experience in life, both within and outside of our love lives. So many of us depend on our romantic partner or partners to feel okay. We rely on them to feel the emotions we want to feel or to avoid feeling the emotions that we don't want to feel. And when we can learn how to generate our own contentment, we don't have to be so emotionally dependent on our partners. And that is a huge win on so many different levels. We'll talk about that next time, but that's it for today. If you would like my help working on your relationship with loneliness or any other aspect of your infidelity situation, let's talk. Listening to the guidance I provide on the podcast is one thing, but having me as your coach who teaches you specific tools and helps you put them into use in your own life is another thing entirely. So if you are ready for change in your infidelity situation, and you want to make change as effectively and efficiently as you possibly can, working with a coach can be the best investment you ever make. When you're ready to get started, you can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com, and you can learn more about the coaching packages I currently offer, along with my current pricing, through the services page of my website. I can't wait to meet you. Okay, everybody, thank you all so much for listening. Have a great week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.